There are days as a leader when it feels like all we're doing all day long is directing traffic. It's getting individuals unstuck by answering their questions. It's course correcting projects by providing needed feedback. It's even slowing some down who might be skipping a few steps and getting a little too far ahead. And when that happens, it's also usually when there's an audit of some sort that suddenly pops up requiring a bunch of documentation, always quote unquote tomorrow, because that's how it works. And the day is filled with meetings and you're supposed to be working on the next strategic move, except that all you're doing all day long, it feels like it's just directing traffic. And you're like, okay, you go, you stop, yes, you can turn. All right. And it gets to be a lot. So what are a few things that leaders can do to get through these traffic control days as best as possible? Well, the first thing I would say is recognizing that whether we like it or not, it's part of our role to support the team. Being a leader does require a lot of energy for us to just generate and dedicate that energy to guiding and supporting the team. Unfortunately, it tends to happen in big clumps. It's always the days when you have a lot going on that everybody's stuck, it seems, that day and needs something from you. So you just have to recognize that that's part of being a leader. It's part of making sure that things are continuing to go smoothly. And of course, there is a distinction to be made between micromanaging and having individuals that feels that they are not empowered and that they are unable to do anything at all without needing your approval for every little thing. At the same time, you have what we're hoping is the environment and culture that the leader has created, which is just normal last pair of eyes, or necessary because it requires budget approval, or necessary because it will have an impact on the client, or it will change the way we do things, or something like that. So it's very important to recognize in which camp we are, because if you start recognizing that it's micromanagement, then that's a whole other issue to deal with. I'm just talking about in the course of normal operations, everyday requirements that pop up that the leader must deal with. Not because they're micromanaging, but just because it's the ultimate responsibility and they just need to approve those things. So it is our responsibility to show up for the team. And it's also our responsibility to understand the importance of us doing so, to the fluidity of operations and keeping things moving. Because ultimately, it can impact the clients, it can impact the level of service, it can impact lead generation. There are so many aspects to it that may be necessary for the leader to be there and address. And the requests, normally, I would say, assuming this is a healthy culture, are tied to something that is essential to the organization. Again, in the ideal scenario where it's not micromanagement and the team feel like they can't do anything because, the leader's never going to be happy, but rather the scenario where they feel empowered, if the team comes to you, it's because it's tied to something essential. And it's tied to an element that would have such an impact that it's important for the leader to be involved at whatever stage it is. So if we really embrace that and recognize that, you know what, there are days where my part of my role is to be that traffic controller and be just making sure that everything keeps moving and that people aren't stuck in various places and everything stops. So try to grab onto that mindset and concept on those days where it's just becoming a bit much. Try to remind yourself of that. The second thing we could do is get really clear on what absolutely must go out that day. Because sometimes dates are really suggestions. So let's say a team member comes to you and, well, of course, it's going to be one of those traffic control days, right? So several team members will come to you and they'll come to you from everywhere. But they will come to you and let's say one person says, okay, I have a question about this. Can you get this to me today? Oh, I have a question about that. Can you get this to me today? Or even they just ask questions without any kind of date or context or anything. And so it's important on those days where there's just so much going on to figure out what is truly essential to that day and what could wait a little bit. Because sometimes there is wiggle room. Sometimes somebody just, hey, I'm just asking the question and you answer me when you get a moment. But on those days when we're just pretty much in survival mode, trying to be like, okay, you, what's going on? Woo, woo, woo. It gets to be a lot and we tend to just like, okay, knock it out, without necessarily thinking about priorities, without necessarily thinking that, hey, you know what, this particular thing could wait a couple of hours, could wait till tomorrow when it's hopefully less frantic. So try to think about if there are dates associated, if there's wiggle room, or if there's a lot going on. Try to ask about whether it's related to something that's time sensitive. And as the day goes on, try to keep track of the quote unquote urgent requests where you can clearly rank them by impact. So as simple as sometimes when it gets really too much, I have an app that I like to keep all my tasks in. But when it gets to be really, really too much on those days, I actually just have a piece of paper next to me and I just write down all the, okay, answer this person, think about this thing, unblock this other person, review this document. And I'll do it manually because it's just easier for me to see. And I don't know, there's something about writing it down that just it leaves my mind. I don't know. It feels better. And if I have it in my app, I don't know. It just seems harder to prioritize, even though it really doesn't, because it has all these little priority 1, priority 2, and I can easily do that. But I don't know. On those days, the easiest for me, it just feels like, you know what? I have my task list in my app, and then I just write all these urgent things on the side on a piece of paper where I can clearly see it. Scratch them off, move them around, go 1, 2, 3, whoop, change that again. And to me, it's the easiest way to deal with those things. So do what works for you, obviously, but I'm just sharing what works best for me. Now, as we're prioritizing these things, especially if it's over a few days, because sometimes, it's over a week or two that you get these super crazy days. So if it starts to be a little bit lengthy, I want to be cautious about not always pushing back the same one poor person just because, there's one thing after another and this person needs to wait. If it really is something that is less of a priority, can they somehow get involved in helping with some of the things just so that they don't feel like what they're doing is useless or not important? Obviously, if the person is there, their role matters, or it should. So hopefully what they're doing, or at least what they're working on, is not only things that have no consequence or no immediate consequence. And if for some reason the project that they're working on is less of a priority given everything that's happening, and they can't somehow be plugged in and help support the rush that is happening, try to let them know so that at least they're not just kind of wondering, well, did they even see this? Are they eventually going to look at this? And just kind of update them a little bit and try at least to do it in a way where they feel like they're important. They should be if they're at your organization. So when on these days as well, when you have your big list, I mentioned pulling in perhaps someone who may be working on less of a priority, but look at other individuals. Maybe somebody else can help with reviewing some of the things. Maybe somebody else has the skills and the level of experience and knowledge to be able to review something that seemingly is only for you. And sometimes it's not. That's an absolute reality. Sometimes, unfortunately, the leader is the only one who can look at these things. But if there is a chance, then that'd be great. Pass it along. And I would say if you have a really good executive assistant, they will spot that for you, and they will spot what they can take on. And they may even be able to say, hey, have you thought of so-and-so, something like that. So if it's possible on those days, if you can have a 5 to 10 minute touch point with them, just to be like, hey, this is what's going on with me today. Are you seeing anything I'm not seeing? And it's just sometimes I feel like, I don't want to say we think we're too important, but some days as leaders, we feel we're too important. And that nobody else but me can do this. It's not always the case, and unfortunately there are days where it is the case, but if it's not, that would be great, and usually a really good executive assistant can help you spot that. So what else can we do on those days when we're trying to survive this traffic control? Mind your mood. Because when there's this increase in pressure, you will likely have a shorter fuse. Yes, I'm speaking by experience. And things that wouldn't normally bother you will make you upset much more quickly. You will tend to be much more impatient. So be acutely aware of that to help avoid snapping at someone who really doesn't deserve to be treated that way. I'm going to say most people don't deserve to be snapped at. So try to be mindful of your mood. And I know that on those days, because of the stress levels, because it's so high, because I'm trying to just unclear this traffic jam and get everybody on their way, on those days with that pressure, I am not as patient. And if somebody has an extra question or something, or they don't understand what I'm saying, I do have a tendency to be a little bit, but it's not good. We cannot do that. We're leaders. We have to learn to control our emotions and self-regulate. So if you're mindful of it, if you start recognizing, it's like, you know what, today is one of those days, remind yourself that you might be hurt or you might have a shorter fuse. And reminding yourself of that will likely help in self-regulating those. And one of the things that I found is really helpful is being professionally transparent. Let's call it that. So let's say I have a meeting, and it happened recently. So I have a meeting, and it's one of those traffic control days where I'm just like, I am pulling my hair out. I feel like my head's going to explode. But I actually said that. So I entered the meeting, and I didn't enter the meeting with my big aura of anger or frustration or stress. So I was very aware of how I was feeling and how the day was going. But I showed up at the meeting, and of course, the first question, "Hi, how are you?" And so all I said was just, and very much in this kind of tone, just, "Oh boy, I feel like my head is going to explode." And then kind of laughed a little bit. And the person who was meeting with me was like, "I know exactly how you feel. I'm having one of those days as well." And, very much in that tone, and trying to detach ourselves from it so that we can survive it. And, it was just so nice to be meeting with someone and being able to say that, and the person felt the same way. And so sometimes we get to vent a little bit, not the big angry, changing all the energy, but just trying to just get a little bit of that steam out, just release the pressure valve just a touch. And of course, sometimes it's not appropriate at all, but sometimes it is. Sometimes you just need to jump right in and knock stuff out, and that's totally cool. But I would say take a moment to breathe. And that's also something that I do frequently. Like if I arrive in a meeting like that and I say, I feel like my head is going to explode. And I say, you know what? I'm going to take a breath. And then I go, well, that kind of helped. And then we kind of laugh a little bit. And sometimes we do it together if we're having one of those days. And it's just, again, just to be mindful and just be like, okay, we'll get through this. We always get through them. We will get through them. So let's face it, there will be days like this. And when they arrive, when we feel like we're directing traffic all day long, it's exhausting. There is a ton of energy that we are generating that is going out into the world to support others. It will leave us tired and highly likely pretty grumpy. At least it does in my case. Because part of it is because it feels like I haven't invested the important stuff, quote unquote, but it really is. Because like I said, it's part of our role. And it's the details that contribute to accomplishing the implementation part of the bigger picture. And so we need to remind ourselves that that's what we're working on when we're doing these on these days. It's accomplishing the implementation part of the bigger picture. And it helps to remind ourselves of that. And also, on those days, let's do everyone a favor by taking a moment for ourselves to get rid of some of that energy before showing up for other people in our lives. And that can take the form of listening to your favorite song a few times, belting it out, finding a private spot to shake it all out, taking some deep breaths of fresh air. Let go of the day. That one's done. Tomorrow will be a new one. Clean slate. And show up hopeful that this one will be better.